Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Transitioning to a Peace Economy: Pathways and Perspectives. I would like to know where everyone's from, so please type in where you're from and your name so that we can get to know you a little better. My name is Katrina Canyon, and I'm the Executive Director of Peace Economy Project, and I'll be the host for today's discussion. Before we get started, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website later for viewing. We encourage you to submit questions at any time during the discussion via the Q&A function, and at the end of the webinar, we will then pose your questions to the panelists. Now we'll start with a short poll that my friend Rachel here will put up. Do you understand the key factors of a peace economy? Yes or no? And it's okay if you don't. We just want to get a register of how familiar people are with peace economies. So has everyone had a chance to answer the question, Rachel? Okay, so it looks like 75% of you are familiar with a peace economy. Hopefully this webinar will help to enlighten your understanding and broaden your understanding of what a peace economy is. Today, we're honored to have two remarkable advocates for peace and justice, Michelle Dunne of the Franciscan Action Network and Jodie Evans, co-founder of CODEPINK. Their extensive experience and passionate advocacy provide them with unique insights into the mechanisms of war, economies, and strategic approaches to advocating for peace and human rights. And now, without further ado, let's dive into today's session. First, we are going to start with me, where I am going to provide you with a brief presentation on the foundations and principles of a peace economy. So, what is a peace economy? A peace economy is an economic system that prioritizes human and environmental well-being and advocates for the peaceful resolution of conflicts. The objective of a peace economy is to reallocate resources from military spending to areas that promote public goods and enhance quality of life. And this is a very broad definition. I'm sure when Jodie speaks that she will have a different, I will let Jodie speak for herself as far as what a peace economy is, but this is a very broad definition just to give you an understanding. The key principles of a peace economy have to do with sustainability, equity and justice, nonviolence, and community and collaboration. With sustainability, under a peace economy, we focus on renewable resources and long-term healing of the environment. We want to ensure that there's fair distribution of these resources. And most importantly, in a peace economy, we like to focus on resolving issues through dialogue and in a nonviolent manner. And community and collaboration is also a very important aspect of a peace economy because we like to see things through dialogue and through diplomacy. The cost of now we're looking at the cost of militarization. When a community or a nation or the world focuses on militarization, we see high expenditures. When one country decides that they need more weapons, then other countries decide that they need more weapons, and you see the spend rate go up really high when there's a focus on militarization. You see resources that are diverted from social programs to military spending, and it's not just a few dollars. It goes into the billions, where you'll see governments, instead of focusing that on education or the environment, they're focusing on military spending. And it causes an economic inequality, especially when you think about how the money goes toward defense contractors instead of towards schools. And there's an extreme environmental impact when military activities significantly harm the environment. A prime example is that the war in Gaza and its environmental impacts that it's having, not only on the region, but on the planet as a whole. And now we're going to compare peace and militarized conflict. Oops, sorry, I went the wrong way there. In comparing peace with a militarized economy, we see that under the main focus of a peace economy, it's human well-being and peace, while under a militarized economy, it's national security and power. Under a peace economy, we have, with conflict resolution, we're focused on dialogue and legal institutions. With a military economy, we're focused on military force and intimidation. With resource allocation, under a peace economy, we're looking at public service and innovation. Under a militarized economy, we are looking at arms and militarization. In a peace economy, the economic priority is sustainable development. In a militarized economy, we're looking at military capabilities. The benefits of a peace economy, you see social cohesion, economic stability, global reputation, and environmental benefits. With a peace economy, you'll see things like higher literacy rates, better education. You have a country that is more stable economically. It improves their global reputation, and they usually have really nice environmental impacts in those countries. Real world examples: Costa Rica, which is one of my favorite examples. In 1949, the president of Costa Rica decided to get rid of all of their military expenditures, and they redirected their funds toward healthcare. Peace Economy Project is currently working on a case study that we hope to have out later in the year on Costa Rica. And Costa Rica is now at a 98% literacy rate, which happened after they decided to redirect their funds towards social and healthcare. Japan, they enacted Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, renouncing war and focusing on food and economic sustainability. Bhutan has a high gross national happiness index because they also focus on cultural wealth and material health.
Katerina, we can't hear you.
How about now?
Thank you.
Thank you. In conclusion, embracing a peace economy offers sustainable and just alternatives to a militarized economic system. Shifting priorities can lead to improved global health, equality, and true security. And it's important that we advocate for policies that support peace over war and sustainability over destruction, because that is the way that we're truly going to save the planet. And so that's it for our introduction into a peace economy. And now I will move on to our panelists. And we'll start with Michelle Dunne of the Franciscan Action Network. Michelle, could you share with us your thoughts and ideas on a peace economy, particularly as the moral imperative and ethical imperative of a peace economy?
Sure. Thank you so much, Katrina. Thanks for inviting me to be with you. I'm really, really excited to have this conversation with you and Jodie. And I'm a learner here. So I'm executive director of Franciscan Action Network. We are a faith-based justice and peace organization. And I only came to this a few years ago. So true confessions, I was part of the national security establishment in the United States. I worked for the US Department of State as a diplomat for almost 20 years. And after that in think tanks, I worked for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And although I personally always had a strong interest in peace and human rights, as a diplomat, you're really very integrated with the military machine, of the United States and everything. So there's a lot about this that I'm still learning. And as I mentioned, I'm speaking to you from a faith perspective. I am a lay Franciscan, also known as a secular Franciscan. I'm not a nun. I'm a lay person, but I'm a member of a religious order. So I'm very inspired by St. Francis of Assisi and St. Clare, as well as Pope Francis. And what I have to say today, it's really about taking that perspective and saying how that informs, can inform a faith-based, way of thinking about a peace economy. Because sometimes there's the idea that people of faith or Christians are not with a peace economy. So and I'll say a little bit about a couple of initiatives, real world initiatives that relate to this. But I want to share a couple of stories from the life of St. Francis, which I think show a deep connection between spirituality and thinking about a peace economy. There are many, many sayings of St. Francis that are very important to me as a lay Franciscan. But if there's one, if I had to just pick out one that I think has been the single most inspirational to me, here is what it is. At one point, St. Francis said to his companions, "Look, brothers, if we have any possessions, we'll need arms to protect them. And these possessions will cause many disputes, and having a lot of possessions in the love of God and neighbor. Therefore, let us decide we don't want to possess anything in the world." So, very often when people think about St. Francis and his vow of poverty, they're thinking about it just, he's a pious person, he wants to focus on prayer. But he had this very profound insight about the connection between wealth and privilege and violence. That is, in the first instance, why he gave up his possessions. St. Francis came from a wealthy merchant family. This is in Italy in the late 1100s and 1200s. What he saw is that when a person or a group or whatever cling to wealth and privilege, then they end up having to use violence to defend that, or have someone use violence on their behalf. And it was because Francis rejected the use of violence that he said, let's not cling to our wealth and our privilege. And I think this can be translated, it could go from the individual level to the national level or whatever, that clinging to inordinate wealth and inordinate privilege will require violence, warfare, coercive policing, so forth, to protect that. Francis had participated in warfare as a young man. There were, the city-states in Italy were fighting. There was also armed warfare between social classes. He had participated in these things and been taken prisoner. He was a prisoner of war for more than a year. He suffered very deep health effects as well as post-traumatic stress disorder from that experience. And he became totally turned against the use of violence. So I think that's something for us to think about, right? Why is the use of violence required? Why is warfare required? It is because of clinging to inordinate wealth and privilege and disadvantaging others. So another reason why Francis gave up his wealth is because he refused to participate in economic exploitation. And again, there were this odd thing about St. Francis that he refused, once he had his religious conversion, he refused to touch currency, coinage, right? Which and he didn't want his brothers or sisters or those who joined his movement. He wanted them to avoid contact with actual currency as much as possible. Why was that? It was because it was a tool of exploitation at his time. They had this system at the time that the value of the currency was deliberately manipulated to exploit the poor and benefit the rich through periodic devaluations. It gets complicated, but basically poor people would be stuck with the devalued currency, and rich people would have a different form of currency that wasn't getting devalued. And so the poor would end up paying more than the rich for the same product. The question is, does that sound familiar to you? I think this is still going on today, where the poor end up paying more than the rich for the same thing. Think about, auto insurance, interest on loans, etc. Right? There are forms of economic exploitation, like sort of baked into our economy. And then, the third, and Francis, that's why he said, I don't want to touch that coinage, because as a previously rich person, he understood this. And he said, you know what? I'm opting out of this whole thing. I'm going to participate in a barter economy as much as possible. I don't want to be part of this currency system that exploits the poor. And the other thing, of course, was that, Francis actually stepped out of his social class, out of his wealthy, privileged social class to live among the poor and the marginalized of his time. He physically moved out of the walled city. He moved out of his gated community, the walled city of Assisi, into the countryside, which is where people who were poor and marginalized lived. And that was, a matter of solidarity for him. More for us to think about. I also want to just read a very short quote about from Pope Francis on the issue of solidarity. And this is from Pope Francis' encyclical Fratelli Tutti. Solidarity means much more than engaging in sporadic acts of generosity. It means thinking and acting in terms of community. It means that the lives of all are more important prior to the appropriation of goods by few. It means combating the structural causes of poverty, inequality, lack of work, lack of housing, denial of social and labor rights. It means confronting the destructive effects of the empire of money. I think that phrase, the empire of money, is a very interesting one. It relates to me back to the issues I've been talking about. I want to add one more profound insight that St. Francis had about economics. St. Francis, he's famous as the patron saint of ecology. People have statues of him in his gardens. This is because St. Francis was a mystic. And as a mystic, he had this profound insight that many mystics reach about the oneness of all humanity and, in fact, of all creation, right? The kinship of all creation. And so he believed that all people, and in fact, all things, all created things, deserve their fair share of the abundance created by God. Francis did believe in work, and in fact, he did not tolerate shirking work, among his friars. But he did not believe that any person or even any living thing, that meeting their basics need should be determined by how much society valued the form of work. Because as we know, our society values some forms of work very, very disproportionately with others. He believed that in creation, God had provided for all and that all deserved their share. So he required, anyone in his order who could work to work, but that he felt that if everyone's basic needs should be met, right? The basic needs of people who could not work should be met. And in many cases, he realized that basic needs would go above what a person could earn. Are we seeing that, in our society, in our economy, that people are working and still cannot meet their basic needs? So after, you know, the brothers or whatever earned what they could through honest labor, if that didn't meet the basic needs of their community, they were encouraged to go out and beg without shame, and that they should do so with their heads held high, knowing that I'm reading here from a book now. This is a new book on Francis of Assisi by Brother Michael Cusato, a well-known Franciscan scholar. And in the research that Brother Michael did for his book, he found that the brothers were told that if they needed to ask for more than they could earn to meet their basic needs, they should do so with heads held high, knowing that possessing sacred dignity of the creatures of God, they were inviting those better off than themselves to use creation in the manner it was intended by the Creator, namely for the good of all. So to me, this principle has profound implications about how we should think about redistribution of income and wealth. And it could be through government programs, right? Just to list a few: child tax credit, SNAP, food subsidies, healthcare programs such as Medicaid, TANF, welfare payments, and also more progressive concepts such as universal basic income. Do we believe, as St. Francis did, that all deserve to have their basic needs met? Those who can work should do so. Those who cannot work still get their basic needs met. And even those who work get their basic needs met when they're over and above what they can earn. They are entitled to do that. There should be no shame put upon people for getting their basic needs met. So, these just, I think, leave me with some interesting questions as we think about transition to a peace economy. So one question: can I shift away in my thinking from the mindset of meritocracy that prevails in our culture to one of universal kinship, that all deserve to have their needs met from God's abundance? Can I learn more about what forms of exploitation of the poor I might be participating in, even unwittingly, and work with others to fix them? And can I think critically about what forms of wealth, privilege, power, national security that I participate in that require violence and coercion to defend them? What is wrong with these systems if it requires violence to defend them? How can they be changed? Just very briefly, Katrina, I want to mention a couple of initiatives. One interesting initiative, and I'll drop a link into the chat in a moment, is called the Economy of Francesco. This is a project initiated by Pope Francis a few years ago, in which he is reaching out primarily to young people, young adults, especially those who are economists, entrepreneurs, researchers, to brainstorm and pilot new economic initiatives. And this is very much related to peace economy based on the teachings of St. Francis. Another one that I want to say that my organization has really become involved in, and I believe CODEPINK is as well, is the Poor People's Campaign here in the United States. This is a revival of a campaign started during the time of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, But this is a campaign to try to address the interlocking challenges of economic injustice, racism, environmental destruction, and militarism with a broad movement that really is using two tools. One is to mobilize poor and low income voters to vote in elections. And the other one is to raise consciousness more broadly among Americans about the massive size and cost of poverty in the United States, which, as you might know, is much larger than we have much more poverty and much deeper poverty in the United States than do other countries with a similar GDP per capita. Okay, and something's wrong here. I'm sure we can discuss more. Why is that? But I'll stop there. I hope that and I really look forward to hearing what Jodie has to say and what our other participants have to contribute.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was really informative, and I really was moved by what you said about Empire of Money, and I'm looking forward to discussing that later toward the end. But right now we're going to introduce Jodie. Jodie is a vigorous activist and the co-founder of CODEPINK, she's renowned for her tireless efforts in promoting peace and demilitarization globally. Her deep understanding of war economies and her strategic approaches to peace advocacy have been pivotal in shaping discussions around peace economies. Welcome, Jodie.
Thank you. So Michelle, that was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing so many things that are part of our work at CODEPINK, including the amazing Pope, who does celebrate a peace economy in his teachings, not just in his speaking out against war and weapons, but also in his teachings about how it is that we can live together. So for those of you who don't know about CODEPINK, it was started as a response to Bush, who was frightening the American people into war on an innocent country using the color code alerts orange, red, and yellow. So we decided to call CODEPINK for peace. And we failed at stopping the war in Iraq. We feel like we've succeeded in stopping the war in Iran, but it's very dicey in the moment. And we continue to work to move the money from war to the needs of a peace economy. And we've been trying to limit the military budget for the last 22 years, while we've watched $22 trillion be stolen from the American taxpayers to fund the war on terror, which also killed 5 million people in the Middle East and has destabilized the Middle East. So yes, to all of the moving the money, it's definitely a part of what CODEPINK does. But in my, our days of disrupting Congress and scratching at the war machine, one of those days I realized, oh, we're not going to end war until we end the war economy, because war just serves the war economy. And that realization had me thinking, well, we need to, yes, continue to scratch at and try to pull back this war machine, but at the same time, we need to be cultivating a peace economy for the future. That if we spend all our time just ensnared in this violence, it takes our life energy away from being able to create what it is we desire. So the war economy for me is the extractive, oppressive, and destructive economy, killing you, your community, and the planet. And to some, it's called capitalism, but we're in late stage capitalism, and it is destroying everything. It's kind of on a suicide mission, taking all of us with it. So I call that the war economy, because that's what war serves. All these wars are only about resources or power over, so that there can be a hegemony, which is the United States, which can force every other country to behave to its needs. Quite frightening. And if you're not from the United States, you've kind of have the US boot on your neck. So the peace economy, as I started to look into it, was the economy that existed before the war economy, before the last like 500 years. And it's been held by the indigenous that have a deep understanding of long-term thinking, of the connection to the earth, to the connection to each other. And so the peace economy, the giving, sharing, caring, thriving, relational, resilient economy, without which none of us would be alive. And that is because our first taste of the peace economy is parenting, is being mothered, being parented, all of that done in a relational way with no expectation of something in return, with the abundances available to serve life. And so the peace economy is what creates conditions conducive for life. And I think about my own life, and I think of how many lives, how many people before me strive so hard that I could have this life. But I'm living in a time where individualism and our culture of the war economy, we live in a war economy culture, have really devolved us into not even valuing life, not even taking care of it. If we don't take care of the planet, that's not taking care of life, because the planet is our home. And so economy in Greek means home. And it really brought me back to this: how do we take care of our home sweet home, our planet, our communities, and the place where we live? And in the sense that it is a space of nurturance, of care. We've forgotten all those things that have been taken away from us by the war economy culture. So we definitely use activism at CODEPINK to work on changing the system, but we also have a deep realization that that system itself is the war economy culture that is violent. And so when we are trying to change it, we're also being used by it. And it's not changing. If anybody hasn't noticed, I'm old, I'm 70, but I've been doing this for a very long time. It's getting worse by the day. And in all the ways that it can. So yes, we scratch out what we can, but what it should be doing, what our tax dollars should be creating for us is, what you described, is that care for the children, for each other, for those that can't. That's available. That abundance is available. But the privatization and of all things that should be commons, and of the sucking of the resources away to the few. There's a billionaire made every 18 hours. That is money sucked away from the needs of the people. And this whole process is dehumanizing. And so what I saw is that with the war economy creating climate change in the way that it is and not stopping. And the thing is that we think we're going to be able to stop these things, but we can't. It's a monster. It's eating itself and it's eating everyone in its path. And it's not conscious. There's not a rational thing we're dealing with. We need to be creating another system that we're agreeing to, because we all agree to this system and we all participate in this system. And I call the ways that keeps us as the addictions to the war economy culture that are forced on us. So those we call the pivots to peace. And if we're going to create a peace economy, it's going to take all of us, and we need to be grounded in that ourselves, because otherwise we're being used by the war economy. Our lives are being used by the war economy for itself. So they're the pivots to peace. The war economy thrives by us feeling alienated. And so we need to be in connection to break ourselves out of that alienation, because it affects our thinking. It affects how we treat each other. Being self-directed instead of community engaged. Well, community is how we survive. That is in the survival of the fittest. That what the survival of the fittest meant was those who had a community and created in community. Competition to interdependence. Competition keeps us separate, keeps us separated from each other, where interdependence is how life is formed. That's if we look to nature, which all of these come from. Nature thrives on interdependence. Transactional to relational. This is one of the big ones. The war economy has us all in transactional. To survive in the war economy, we survive by being transactional. So that's one of the hardest ones I think the CODEPINKers have breaking, because it is so deep inside of us. We don't even realize it. We don't realize any of these, how deep they are inside of us and how they take us away from life and take us away from each other and take our own selves away from our beautiful humanity and the relationship we could be having with each other and the planet. So these are the pivots to peace. And I don't have time to go through all of them, but you'll, take a look at them. You'll recognize ones that fit with you, that you recognize deeply, like urgency to wisdom, that urgency, being in that urgent state, takes away our capacity to even build wisdom, which is so desperately needed right now. One of my favorites is problem solving to managing complexities. And this is one where I've really talked to a lot of people about this one recently. And so many people understand that they were trying to solve problems and they created more and worse problems. And that managing complexities is really about being in relationship with reality, in the constant change that is life, in all the pieces of the complexity, because we solve problems without recognizing the whole. And really, the managing complexities is what nature does and how we need to be in relationship with each other and nature. And then individualism to self-responsibility. Self-responsibility is at the core of all religions. And yet we're in this church of individualism in the war economy that is destroying us and the planet and not serving anyone. We can see it doesn't make anyone happy. And I'm actually talking to you from China. And one of the things I was really recognizing today is the crazy amount of joy and laughter and possibility that exists here. And this culture is 3,000 years old, and Confucianism and Buddhism are all rooted in, when I say these are indigenous, well, that's one of the things that's indigenous here is Confucianism, where everybody understands their relationship to the earth and to each other and values that and thinks about the whole, not their individualism. And it's quite a stark difference when you come to the United States and you're here in that. You can actually feel it. I call it the cloud of despair. It doesn't seem to hang here. So those are our pivots to peace, but let me just give you a little more overview of how you can be yourself, pivoting from the war economy to the peace economy. So Emily, if we could have the next slide. So yes, the local peace economy is all around us. And when I started this in my own community, so one of the things we say is create your community, find your community, but the first thing you do is always operate in community. And so I pulled together my community in Venice Beach, California, and we said, well, where does the war economy most felt by the people in our community? Who's suffering that the most? And what we found out is that 1,500 homeless kids lived in our neighborhood. And so that became where our attention was. And that, the peace economy is love. The peace economy is care. It's that creation of home sweet home. So how can we start to have that care for these young people in our community? And so we made sandwiches on Saturday and we fed them out of the back of our car. And then we ended up I have a Baptist church around the corner, and he gave us the church for a day. And then we brought people who, could do therapy with them, and the local clinic that could bring in healing and clothes, and we would ask them what they needed. And so the whole community would be serving the needs of these young people. And that's, the way that you get everyone into the relationship of what it is even to be homeless, not from a place of, oh, they're bad, I'm good, but from the place of, how do I serve those who have less than me? So that was the one we did in our community. But here's some others that we've listed. And, at the Local Peace Economy website, we have a whole wiki full of stories from around the country and around the world about how you can engage as a practitioner in the local peace economy, whether it's, in your community or coming up with an issue that you have and building a co-op around it, or building a collective around it, or creating mutual aid. I want to say something about a local peace economy where that kind of culture is more prevalent than a war economy culture. And one of those is like Asheville, North Carolina, which has many of these projects, and it's very relational. And during the 2008 recession, it suffered the least. And so, a study into see this and other local peace economies, what does that mean? It suffered the least. The less amount of people were kicked out of their houses, less people lost their jobs. Why? Because if you're, at a bank in a small community that's connected, you're not kicking somebody out of their house. You're figuring it out. And the same with the jobs. People in the jobs figured out how to job share, figured out how to take less hours so that everybody could have a job. So you figure things out because it's relational. And we could see this in 2008 in the communities that already functioned closer to a peace economy than a war economy than some of the other cities. So you can find out more about all these different ways to be finding a local peace economy near you, finding a community near you, at our wiki at the Local Peace Economy page. And I'm sure that Emily's posting some of these links. Emily, can we have the next slide? I don't think I can do it.
I'm on the next slide. Is it not coming up?
There we are. Yeah, great. Thanks. So there's capacities also in a peace economy. So we're pivoting out of our addictive habits created by the war economy, but there's also capacities in building the peace economy and creating the peace economy. And I just also saw a recent study that showed with both AI and climate change, those that would survive would be those that have created peace economy structures. One of the most important ones is listening. The war economy doesn't like listening. And so how do we listen to the earth? How do we listen to each other? How do we listen to our needs? And need is also a very key word. It's like, how do we serve needs instead of the wants that are created by the war economy to keep us on that endless hamster wheel? Also mapping, really like grounding ourselves where we are. So much of our culture has this, I call us as little corks on the ocean. We've been unrooted from our values, from our communities, from where we live even. And so how do we reroot ourselves so that we can be strong and flexible like those trees that can move? But, mapping really helps us understand where we live, who we are, who we're related to, and even where do we want to go. So mapping is one of the things we do, and you can do it in so many ways, from our history to what we have to give to the present. Community, cultivating community, being part of a community, and seeding with the community what you can be doing local, in creating local peace economy projects, organizing. So once you have a community, it's like, how do you organize beyond your community and bring people in to understand, to learn? In organizing, we say we educate, inspire, and activate. Centering culture. Another like reference to China that we were talking today with a friend that I was walking with, and there's just so much rich culture. I was just walking from the train station to the hotel, and there was, a Chinese ethnic group doing a dance in their costumes with umbrellas. Then there was another Chinese group doing like a square dance kind of thing. And then there was another group doing drumming. And then there was another group doing Tai Chi. And then somebody was playing badminton, like in the middle of the square. So if we think that our culture is a war economy culture, if you look at those pivots, it's also devoured culture itself. So that art, music isn't made to touch your soul. It isn't made for that moment of, awakening, of connecting. It's made for commerce, which makes it devoid really of culture and devoid of that connectivity to the ephemeral, to the oneness that is and has been what culture's been in so many in our past and is around the world. So centering culture and letting that space of how do we sing to each other? How do we play music that moves each other? How do we create theater and storytelling in ways, because it too has been co-opted, and storytelling is core to being human, but it's been co-opted as a distraction and as a tool of the empire, as a tool of the State Department. So, how do we break ourselves out of the co-optation of our brains that's been happening into the reconnection of life and on storytelling? And then what stories are we paying attention to? The stories of the war machine or the stories of the peacemakers, like, we heard earlier. So, and I know I'm probably over, is the other thing is when we do this work, we start to grieve what we've lost, grieve what our lives have been used for. And so we call it our circle of reconnection, our cycle of reconnection, where we go from grief to care to joy and celebration over and over again as we learn our space of resilience and reconnection and understanding and into the creation of the future that we all dream for. And I think, yes, if you download our free book and give yourself 9 months, you will be blown away by who you are and what you have to offer the new world. So thank you. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you so much, Jodie. This has been a really informative conversation, and I really appreciate both of you for sharing what you have about peace economy. We have one question here. It's a little long. It says, I don't expect an answer now, but I am thinking that looking into making this transition, how might some of the ideas from my writing, the energy paradigm shift, transferring fear into a green energy economy, COP26 edition, fit into this important peace endeavor? In my writing, I discuss that unless we solve the climate crisis, nothing else will matter. And then it goes into the benefits of growing green energy economy far outweigh the waning benefits of a dying fossil fuel industry and outmoded old paradigm energies, including fracking and plastics, mega dams, and nuclear power. The old fossil fuel industry is fighting tooth and nail, clinging to old ways that are killing the planet. All those who profit from these outdated industries are exacerbating the climate crisis, leading us to total annihilation and disturbing the peace. So they're talking about mostly about how to integrate some of these ideas into their own work.
Well,
And
feel free to reach out and come join one of we have a call every other Wednesday. Come join us. I mean, we all do that work on the side, because that's the war economy we're talking about, the extractive, destructive, oppressive economy. And many of us are super engaged in that. But also war is the greatest contributor to climate change. It's the greatest user of fossil fuels. So we have a huge campaign at CODEPINK called War is Not Green to try to end wars as they are the greatest users of fossil fuels, and they're usually over fossil fuels. But again, I go back to these are monsters, and stopping them we haven't been super successful at, and building the better and moving people off of the war economy will be a different kind of transition, because a lot of us, we say we want to transition off, but we ourselves aren't transitioning off. And I say this to the code pinkers all the time. It's like when they are asking a member of Congress to do something, I'm like, but you haven't done it yourself. So much we have to look at ourselves and see what are we doing, because we're asking a member of Congress to do that and we haven't done it. So it's really bringing it back to the self-responsible to take it to the top. I mean, we live in a structure.
I think we lost Jodie.
State
Yes.
of
Oh, there we go.
sorry, the structure is allowing a genocide. We're talking about peace, things that have been held peace together for thousands of years, like not bombing an embassy. Like those things, that's not recent. That's thousands of years of peace have understood what an embassy is, has understood what diplomacy is. We live right now in a country that does not use diplomacy, just drives war. And we're all going to have to learn to be building what we need together, because it has failed and we're watching it fail. And I think it's for us to, instead of being demoralized by it, we should be inspired to be creating and creating ourselves away from and into, yes, away from fossil fuels and into alternative forms.
Thank you, Jodie. In thinking about this and what you said had me think about back to what Michelle said about the empire of money. And I can't help but, of course, compare it to like a community of peace and what you were talking about. Michelle, can you talk more about the empire of money versus a community of peace and how we should transform from one to the other?
Sure. I mean, look, I think there's a lot in common here. I mean, to pull a few threads out of Jodie's presentation, the whole issue of relationality versus transactionalism, in relationships. So that is, and Pope Francis talks about this a lot, in his encyclicals in Laudato Si, as well as Fratelli Tutti. He talks about cultivating a culture of encounter and relationality instead of transactionalism in relations among people. So there's a lot there in terms of how we value and what we value. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves that we are kind of prisoners of our culture and our cultural programming and updating and getting to the kind of thinking that we're talking about here is a real journey for all of us. Jodie mentioned a couple of things about our addiction to the war economy, um, and our need to shift to thinking about serving needs rather than wants or desires that are created, by our culture. And I wanted to raise one point. I'm actually really curious what Jodie would say about this. So Jodie, in my organization, we screened the film. You might be familiar with it, called The Letter, about Pope Francis and his encyclical Laudato Si and so forth. And it makes a really impassioned plea for a kind of transition, right, away from fossil fuels to a sustainable way of living and relationality, and it's all there. So we had a discussion after the film, and there was one woman in the group, and I really appreciated her honesty, because she said, um, this all sounds wonderful, but it scares me. I don't understand. I don't. She said, are you talking about we have to go back to a pre industrial revolution standard of living? Is that how we're going to need to live to get back to sustainability and relationality? And she said, frankly, I don't think I can make it without air conditioning. So I'm just curious, how do you, respond to, it was a very, very honest, fear. Um,
Okay, but
how do you
so,
respond
I
to
mean,
this kind of questions?
that's a little bit about individualism. 3/4 of the world lives without air conditioning. So, first I will speak to we live a very privileged lives that are destroying the world for others. Like, the climate change is going to affect the poor that we've stolen from across the world as the hegemony of the United States. So I'm sorry for that woman that she's going to be without air conditioning, but I want to go back to the people don't change because they create these fears instead of, and I want to just talk about people who've changed, who've done the 9 months. And I talked to Reverend, I was part of the founding of the Poor People's Campaign, and way at the beginning, he talked about how Moral Mondays was also 9 months, and that it was 9 months before the person would then get, oh, I get it. I'm being lied to, and my vote's being used against me. That's how he was using it. So it's more saying everything points to, and including today, with the UN saying we have 2 years, and if we don't change, it's like there's no changing. We're past the 1.5. And so we are going to have to simplify. You can do it electively. And I would say whenever we change individually, it's always better to do it electively than have that accident force us to do it, right? So think about it as like a choice lets you choose all the way there. But if she's talking about losing her electricity, I'm going to tell you worse things are going to happen than her losing her electricity. Because if you don't have a community, if you haven't figured out how to live together in your community, it's going to be worse than losing your electricity. It's going to be scary. It's going to be really scary. But security, which is what we spend all our tax dollars on, 65% of your tax dollars on security, which is making the world insecure and taking security away from us. Security is in relationship. And so, the government, the State Department does this to us. It like gives us all these fears, like, everybody's afraid of Putin, you're made afraid of Putin, and then they get to go to war. It's like, we're used by these fears. That's why we started CODEPINK. Oh my God, Saddam Hussein, which had nothing. It was like a country that had nothing. We should be ashamed of ourselves for even dropping a bomb on these people who had nothing, that we'd already starved them and killed 500,000 children. It's, gross. So we get set up in this way the war economy uses us with these big fears instead of living into it. Because people who live into it, when I say, what have you learned for the war economy? They're like, oh my God, I am so happy. I am so full of joy. And I've never worked harder in my life, but I've never been happier. Like, why are we avoiding work? Because work is what gives us our humanity, is what gives our meaning. It's what gives us our connectivity. It's what gives us our things to give away. It's like, so it's like instead we're enslaved instead of doing what all people have done throughout history, is a form of work that brings them joy. Another thing I'm seeing in China is like, nobody's anxious about the work they're doing. Nobody's complaining. They're doing their work and they're living their lives. But we now live in this like contortion of what work is, instead of what is the work of being alive, of being human, of moving our bodies, of serving each other, of like creating home. So you'd be surprised what you can do without when you're happy.
Yeah, just one word on this, Katrina. I think a lot of this comes down to whether we are living in a fear and scarcity mindset or in a mindset of, I would say, relationality and abundance, right? I mean, it just everything, the way you see all these things and so that's a big issue. And I'm sort of assuming that's what your 9-month process is about, is helping people to transition from one of those mindsets to another.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Also what our Franciscan spirituality is about, although, in a different way.
Thank you both so much. I believe that you've all added your web pages and everything into the chat, and it has been a wonderful discussion. And I am adding Peace Economy Project's website as well for people if they're interested in more of these programs. Go to our site and sign up for our mailing list, and don't forget to do the same for CODEPINK and the Franciscan Action Network. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks
Peace.
so much. Yeah, great to be with you.
Peace.
Peace and all good, as we say. Bye.
Okay.